Rich kids laughed at single dad veteran's old truck. He saved their father's life. They called him a broke loser for driving that rusty pickup until the night their dad's car burst into flames. And the man they mocked came roaring through the fire to save them all. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Jake Harlow guided his old Ford pickup through the quiet streets of Maple Grove, the autumn breeze rustling through the colorful maple trees that lined the road. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, and the truck's engine hummed its familiar tune, a mix of rattles and creaks that had become like music to Jake's ears. "Hey, Emma, what does a car say when it's sleepy?" Jake glanced at his daughter, her backpack clutched tight against her chest. "It says, I'm exhausted." He chuckled at his own joke, watching Emma's face light up despite trying to act too grown-up to laugh at dad jokes. "That's so bad, Daddy." Emma giggled, her pigtails swaying as she shook her head. The sound of her laughter warmed Jake's heart, reminding him so much of Lisa's. As they approached Maple Grove Elementary, Jake noticed the cluster of teenagers hanging out by the entrance. The Benson brothers, Tommy and Ryan, stood among them in their designer jackets and pristine sneakers. Jake's truck announced their arrival with a particularly loud squeak of the brakes. "Look what just rolled out of the junkyard," Tommy Benson called out, nudging his brother. "Hey, Harlow, my dad's dealership has a great trade-in program. Might get you $50 for that heap." The other kids burst into laughter, and Jake felt Emma shrink beside him. Her cheeks flushed pink, and she stared down at her worn sneakers. The sight of her embarrassment made Jake's chest tighten, but he kept his expression gentle. "Emma, sweetheart," he said softly, turning to face her. "You see that rust on our truck? That's like a badge of honor. Means this old girl's weathered every storm and kept on rolling, just like us." Emma's eyes met his, uncertain but trying to believe. "But they're laughing, Daddy." "Let them laugh," Jake replied, his voice steady and warm. "Some folks never learned that the shine on something doesn't tell you its worth. Remember what Mom used to say about real gold? It doesn't tarnish," Emma whispered, a small smile tugging at her lips. "That's right. Now go show them what a Harlow's made of." Jake watched as Emma climbed out, straightening her shoulders just like her mother used to do when facing a challenge. After dropping Emma off, Jake took the long way to work, his route passing by Oakwood Cemetery. The morning fog still clung to the headstones, and Jake slowed the truck as he approached the familiar spot. Lisa's gravestone stood under an old oak tree, her favorite flowers, purple irises, planted around it. Jake pulled over, the truck's engine ticking as it cooled. "Morning, honey," he said quietly, looking at the stone through the passenger window. "Emma's growing up so fast." "She's got your spirit, strong and beautiful." He paused, swallowing hard. "Still doing my best, honey. Some days are harder than others, but we're making it." The evening found Jake in their small kitchen, the smell of melting butter and toasting bread filling the air. Emma sat at the worn kitchen table, her homework spread out before her as Jake flipped grilled cheese sandwiches in the pan. "Daddy?" Emma asked, chewing on her pencil eraser. "Why don't we get a new truck? Billy's dad just got one, and it doesn't make any noises at all." Jake slid the golden brown sandwich onto Emma's plate, considering his words carefully. "Well, sweetheart, this one's paid for, and it's ours." He sat down across from her, his own sandwich steaming. "You know what that means? No payments, no debt. Your mom and I always believed that owning something simple was better than owing for something fancy." Emma took a bite of her sandwich, thinking this over. "But what if it breaks down? Then we'll fix it, just like we always do." Jake reached across the table and gently tapped her nose, leaving a small smudge of engine grease he hadn't quite scrubbed off. "Besides, that truck carried you home from the hospital when you were born, helped us move into this house, took us on every camping trip. It's part of our family story." After dinner and homework, Jake tucked Emma into bed, pulling her purple comforter up to her chin. Her room was filled with drawings, some of their family, some of their truck, all filled with the pure perspective of a child's love. "Look, Daddy." Emma pointed to her window. "The stars are really bright tonight." Jake settled on the edge of her bed, following her gaze to the clear night sky. The stars twinkled against the darkness, reminding him of all the nights he and Lisa had spent stargazing on the hood of that old truck. A familiar mix of emotions washed over him as he sat there. Gratitude for these quiet moments with Emma, for their simple but full life, alongside the bone-deep weariness that came from carrying so much on his own. He let out a soft sigh, reaching over to smooth Emma's hair. "Sweet dreams, princess," he whispered, his heart full of love for this precious girl, who made every struggle worthwhile. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Jake's small auto repair shop, casting warm patches on the concrete floor. Tools hung neatly on the wall, each one in its assigned spot, a habit he'd kept from his military days. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal filled the air as he bent over an old Chevy's engine. "Almost done, Mrs. Peterson," Jake called out to the elderly woman sitting in the waiting area. "Just tightening up that loose belt." He worked carefully, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. The door chimed, and Jake's landlord, Mr. Mitchell, walked in. His footsteps echoed against the walls. "Morning, Harlow," he said, rubbing his clean-shaven chin. "Hope I'm not interrupting." Jake straightened up, wiping his hands on the red shop rag tucked into his belt. "Not at all. What can I do for you?" Mr. Mitchell shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Just wanted to remind you, rent's coming due next week." He paused, clearing his throat. "Times are tough all over." "I know," Jake nodded, trying to keep his voice light. "Don't worry, I'll have it ready." After the landlord left, Jake returned to Mrs. Peterson's car, his mind running numbers. The shop had been quiet lately, too quiet. He finished the repair and charged her his usual modest rate, helping her into her car with a gentle smile. The phone rang just as he was sorting through a stack of bills. He picked it up, expecting another cancellation. Jake Harlow speaking. "Mr. Harlow?" The voice was deep, authoritative. "This is Frank Benson, from Benson Motors." Jake's eyebrows rose. Everyone knew Benson Motors, the gleaming dealership on the edge of town that sold cars worth more than his entire shop. "We've got a situation here," Frank continued. "A 1965 Mercedes-Benz 280 SE. Previous shop declared it hopeless, but I've heard you're the man who can fix anything. Would you be willing to take a look?" Jake's heart picked up speed. Classic cars were his specialty, though he rarely got to work on them anymore. "Yes, sir. I can come by this afternoon." "Excellent. See you at 2. Jake hung up the phone, hope warming his chest. This could be the break he needed. He closed up early, changed into his cleanest work shirt, and drove his old pickup to Benson Motors. The dealership sparkled in the afternoon sun, all glass and chrome. Jake parked his truck between sleek new luxury vehicles, feeling out of place. As he walked toward the entrance, he caught sight of familiar faces through the window. The same teenagers who'd mocked his truck yesterday. Frank Benson's sons. The boys noticed him too. One nudged the other, whispering something that made them both snicker. "Dad's hiring the old rust bucket guy," carried clearly through the glass. Jake squared his shoulders and walked past them, pretending not to hear. He'd weathered worse than teenage taunts. Frank Benson met him at the service entrance, extending a well-manicured hand. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Harlow. Follow me." He led Jake to a covered car in the corner of the pristine service bay. When Frank pulled back the cover, Jake's breath caught. The Mercedes was beautiful even in its current state, a classic silver color under years of neglect. "She's been sitting in a barn for 20 years, Frank explained. "Previous mechanic said the engine was beyond saving. But I hate giving up on classics." Jake circled the car slowly, taking in every detail. "Mind if I take a look under the hood?" "Be my guest." For the next few hours, Jake lost himself in the work. He cleaned connections, tested systems, and carefully diagnosed each problem. The boys walked past several times, but Jake stayed focused on the task at hand. This wasn't about them. This was about the car and doing the job right. As evening approached, the showroom lights dimmed. Jake straightened up, his back aching but satisfied. He'd found the problem. Several, actually, but nothing impossible to fix. "Ready to try her?" he asked Frank, who'd been watching with increasing interest. "You mean you've already?" Frank looked surprised. Jake slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life with a deep, healthy purr. Frank's eyes widened. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. Then louder, "You've got golden hands, Harlow." Jake allowed himself a small smile as he shut off the engine. Through the service bay window, he could see Frank's sons watching, their earlier smirks replaced with looks of disbelief and grudging respect. "Just needs a few parts." "Replaced," Jake explained, wiping his hands on his shop rag. "Week's work, maybe 2. I can write up an estimate tonight." Frank nodded, still staring at the car in amazement. "Do it. Whatever it takes to get her running like that again." The autumn morning painted Jake's small kitchen in gentle golden light as he stood at the stove, flipping pancakes. Emma sat at their worn wooden table, her legs swinging beneath her chair as she carefully wrapped his sandwich in wax paper. "Daddy, I made it extra special," she announced, drawing a little heart on the paper with her red marker. "Because it's your first real day at the fancy car place," Jake chuckled, sliding a perfectly round pancake onto her plate. "Fancy, huh? Still just fixing cars, sweetheart. Just shinier ones than usual." "But they're rich people cars," Emma said matter-of-factly, drowning her pancake in syrup. "Like the ones in movies." Jake ruffled her hair as he sat down across from her. "Rich or poor? Honey, every car's got 4 wheels and an engine that needs fixing sometimes." He took a bite of his breakfast, watching his daughter's face light up as she told him about how she'd organized his lunch. "Turkey sandwich, apple, and I put in 2 cookies," she reported proudly. "The chocolate chip ones we made yesterday. Well now, that makes me the luckiest mechanic in town." Jake checked his watch, an old Timex his wife had given him years ago. "Time to get moving, kiddo. Can't be late on my first day." At Benson Motors, the showroom gleamed with polished chrome and fresh wax. Jake walked through the service entrance, toolbox in hand, nodding good morning to the other mechanics, who eyed him with mild curiosity. "Morning, Harlow," Frank Benson called from his office. "Got a Mercedes in Bay 3 that's been giving us fits. Think you can take a look?" "Yes, sir," Jake replied, already rolling up his sleeves. He could hear Tommy and Ryan Benson's voices somewhere in the building, but he focused on the building, task at hand. By mid-morning, Jake had diagnosed and fixed the Mercedes problem, a tricky electrical issue others had missed. The customer, a well-dressed businessman, was impressed by Jake's clear explanation and honest assessment. "Most places would have tried to sell me a whole new system," the man commented to Frank. "Nice to find someone who tells it straight." Around noon, Grace Benson arrived carrying takeout bags from the local deli. She was elegant but warm, her smile genuine as she spotted Jake working nearby. "You must be Jake Harlow," she said, approaching his workstation. "Frank told me about your amazing work with that restoration yesterday." Jake wiped his hands on a shop rag. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Please, call me Grace." She gestured to a framed photo on Jake's toolbox, him and Lisa on their wedding day. "Is that your wife?" Jake's eyes softened. "Yes, ma'am. Grace, that's Lisa. She passed 5 years ago. Cancer." "I'm so sorry," Grace said quietly. "Frank mentioned you're raising your daughter alone. That can't be easy." "Emma makes it worth every minute," Jake replied, his voice gentle with pride. "Lisa would have loved seeing her grow up. She's got her mama's heart." From across the showroom, Tommy and Ryan watched their mother chatting with Jake. "Mom's talking to the junk man again," Tommy muttered, rolling his eyes. "Boys!" Frank's stern voice startled them. He'd been watching Jake work all morning, seen how he treated every customer with respect, regardless of their attitude, how he helped the younger mechanics without making them feel foolish. There was something about the man's quiet dignity that made Frank increasingly uncomfortable about his son's behavior. The afternoon passed quickly. Jake's expertise proved invaluable on several difficult repairs, and even the initially skeptical mechanics were seeking his advice by day's end. "Good work today, Harlow," Frank said as Jake packed up his tools. "You've got a real gift with these machines." "Thank you, sir. My daddy always said if you're gonna do something, do it right." Jake checked his watch. Need to pick up Emma from her friend's house. See you tomorrow. The evening air was cooling as Jake pulled up to the Williams house in his old truck. Emma bounded out, pigtails flying, clutching her backpack. Daddy, I told Mrs. Williams and Sarah about your new job. She climbed in, practically bouncing with excitement. I told my teacher too. She said it's wonderful you're working at Benson Motors now. Jake chuckled, starting the engine. Is that right? Uh-huh. I said my daddy fixes rich people's cars now because he's the best mechanic ever. The radio played soft country music as they drove home, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Emma hummed along, her small hand resting on Jake's arm. Daddy? Yes, sweetheart? Are you happy at your new job? Jake glanced at his daughter's earnest face, heart full of love. You know what? I really am. They drove on through the gathering dusk, the old truck's headlights cutting through the evening shadows, leading them home. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the showroom windows of Benson Motors. Jake sat at his temporary desk in the service department, carefully filling out repair reports. The gentle scratch of his pen and the distant hum of the building's heating system were the only sounds in the otherwise empty dealership. He glanced at the clock, 7:15 p.m. Most employees had left hours ago, but Jake wanted to make sure everything was perfect. He'd learned in the military that attention to detail mattered, especially when starting a new position. His weathered hands moved methodically across each form, documenting every repair with careful precision. Standing up from his desk, Jake stretched his tired muscles and gathered his belongings. The keys jingled in his pocket as he walked through the service bay, checking that all the equipment was properly stored. The smell of motor oil and leather cleaner lingered in the air, familiar scents that had become the backdrop of his life. As he moved toward the main office to drop off the completed paperwork, voices drifted through the partially open door. Jake recognized Frank Benson's distinctive tone, but there was another voice, sharper, more insistent. Frank, you're being ridiculous, the voice said. These safety inspections are killing our margins. Everyone cuts corners these days, it's just business. Jake froze mid-step, his hand clutching the folder of papers. Through the gap in the door, he could see Frank pacing behind his desk, while another man, Victor Rowe, Frank's business partner, leaned against a filing cabinet. I don't know, Victor, Frank replied, running a hand through his gray hair. Using substandard parts, falsifying inspection records. If something happened, nothing will happen. Victor cut in, his voice smooth as silk but lined with steel. Look, we're talking about an extra 30% profit here. Think about your boys' college funds. Think about staying competitive with those bigger dealers in the city. Jake's stomach clenched. He stood absolutely still, barely breathing. The folder felt heavy in his hands. The parts we'd be using. Frank hesitated. They're not exactly unsafe, right? Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course not. They're just alternative options. Everyone does it, Frank. Everyone. We're just being smart businessmen. Jake quietly backed away from the door, his heart pounding. He placed the folder in the night drop box instead of delivering it personally, then walked quickly through the darkened showroom. The pristine vehicles gleamed under the security lights, but suddenly they seemed less perfect, less trustworthy. Outside, the evening air felt cool against his face. Jake climbed into his old truck, but didn't start it right away. He sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, mind racing with what he'd just heard. The dealership's lights cast long shadows across the parking lot, and Jake felt the weight of knowledge pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. The drive home seemed longer than usual. Streetlights flickered past as Jake's mind replayed the conversation over and over. He thought about all the families who brought their vehicles to Benson Motors, trusting the dealership with their safety. He thought about his own daughter, about all the children who rode in those cars. When he pulled into his driveway, Emma was waiting at the window. She waved excitedly, her smile visible even through the glass. Jake forced himself to smile back, pushing down his troubled thoughts. "Daddy," Emma called out as he walked through the door. "Look what I made in art class today." She thrust a piece of paper into his hands, bouncing on her toes with excitement. Jake's genuine smile broke through his worry as he looked at the drawing. There was their old Ford pickup, rendered in careful crayon strokes, parked beneath a vibrant rainbow. Emma had even included the small dent in the passenger door and the slightly rusty tailgate. Above the drawing, in careful letters, she'd written, "Home on Wheels." See? Emma pointed to the details. "I drew our truck exactly like it is. Mrs. Peterson said it was really good because it tells a story." She beamed up at him. "Do you like it?" Jake pulled her into a tight hug. "I love it, sweetheart. It's perfect." His voice caught slightly. Just perfect. After dinner and Emma's bedtime routine, Jake stepped out onto the small front porch. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and approaching winter. His old truck sat in the driveway, its familiar silhouette a comfort in the darkness. The porch light cast a warm glow around him as he sank into the worn wooden chair. Stars twinkled overhead, the same stars he and Lisa used to watch together. His fingers absently twisted the wedding ring he still wore. "What's the right thing, Lisa?" he whispered into the night. The words hung in the quiet air, unanswered. His truck sat silently in the shadows, its presence both a reminder of his struggles and his principles. Saturday dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn morning that usually lifted Jake's spirits. The air carried the sweet scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys, promising a perfect day for their weekly ritual. Emma stood on their small front porch, her woven market basket clutched in both hands, practically bouncing on her toes with excitement. She'd been looking forward to this trip all week, picking out fresh apples from Mrs. Henderson's orchard stand, and maybe finding some of that golden honey from old Mr. Wilson's beehives. The farmer's market was one of the few places where Emma felt truly happy, surrounded by friendly faces and the warm bustle of community. Jake jingled his keys as he approached the truck, already planning their route through the market stalls. Emma loved to sample the free apple slices and always convinced him to buy an extra jar of preserves for special occasions. These Saturday mornings were their time together, away from the whispers and stares that seemed to follow them everywhere else. He slid the key into the ignition and turned it with the practiced motion of countless mornings. The engine coughed once, sputtered weakly, then fell completely silent. The dashboard lights flickered briefly, before dying. Jake's stomach sank. He tried again, pumping the gas pedal gently, but nothing happened except a weak clicking sound that echoed mockingly in the morning stillness. "Come on, old girl," Jake muttered under his breath, patting the cracked steering wheel with genuine affection. "Not today. Please, not today." He climbed out slowly, his joints protesting from too many hours bent over engines and too many nights on uncomfortable cots during his army days. Lifting the hood with both hands, he was greeted by the familiar smell of oil, metal, and the faint sweetness of antifreeze. The engine bay looked like an old friend. Every wire, every hose, telling the story of years of careful maintenance and creative repairs. Emma wandered over from the porch, her small face pinched with the kind of concern that seemed too old for her 10 years. Her market basket swung at her side as she peered up at the open hood. "Is she sick, Daddy?" Jake couldn't help but smile at his daughter's way of talking about the truck like it was a beloved family pet. Emma had named the old Ford Rosie when she was 6, claiming the rust spots looked like freckles. "Just being stubborn today, sweetheart. You know how cranky we all get when we don't feel our best. Let me take a look and see what's bothering her." As he leaned over the engine, running his practiced hands along the battery cables and checking connections, the distinctive purr of an expensive engine grew louder from down the street. Jake's shoulders tensed instinctively. He knew that sound all too well. The deep, powerful rumble of German engineering and money. Lots of money. A gleaming black SUV rolled to a stop beside their driveway, its chrome bumper and pristine paint job catching the morning sunlight like a mirror. The vehicle was so spotless, it might have just rolled off the showroom floor. Its tinted windows slid down with an electronic whisper, revealing Tommy and Ryan Benson's sneering faces. 2 other teenagers sat in the back seat, their expressions equally mocking. "Need a tow, old man?" Tommy called out, his voice dripping with false concern and barely contained laughter. His perfectly styled hair caught the breeze as he leaned out the window. That thing looks like it belongs in a junkyard. Maybe it's time to put it out of its misery." The other teenagers erupted into snickers and whispered comments that Jake couldn't quite make out but could easily imagine. Ryan added his own cruel observation. "My dad says some people just don't know when to give up on lost causes." Emma immediately stepped behind Jake, pressing her small face into the worn fabric of his work jacket. He could feel her tiny hands gripping the material so tightly her knuckles must have been white. Her basket dropped to the ground with a soft thud, forgotten in her rush to hide from the cruel laughter. Jake straightened slowly, forcing his lips into the kind of pleasant smile that had gotten him through countless difficult moments in the army and beyond. His jaw ached from the effort of maintaining that expression, every muscle in his face fighting against the humiliation burning in his chest. He raised his hand in what he hoped looked like a casual, friendly wave. "All good here, boys," he called back, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "You all have a nice day now. Drive safe." The SUV lingered for what felt like an eternity, more cruel laughter spilling out through the open windows. Jake could see phone cameras pointed in their direction, probably capturing this moment for social media mockery later. Finally, with a roar of expensive horsepower, the vehicle pulled away, leaving behind only the acrid smell of exhaust and the echo of teenage cruelty. Jake watched it disappear around the corner, his forced smile fading the moment they were out of sight. The morning suddenly felt colder, the sunshine less bright. A small, heartbroken sob broke the heavy silence. Jake turned to find Emma's eyes brimming with unshed tears, her lower lip trembling like a leaf in the wind. Her entire small body seemed to shake with the effort of holding back her emotions. "Oh, sweetheart," Jake said softly, immediately kneeling down beside her on the cold pavement. Her abandoned market basket lay on its side, the carefully folded shopping list she'd written the night before scattered by the autumn breeze. "Come here to Daddy." Emma fell into his arms without hesitation, her tears finally breaking free. To dampen his shirt, her small shoulders shook with each sob. "Why are they so mean to us?" she hiccuped between tears. "Why do they hate us so much? We never did anything bad to them." Jake held her close, his own heart breaking at the pain in her voice. He thought carefully about his words, remembering how Lisa always seemed to know exactly what to say in moments like these. His late wife had possessed an almost magical ability to turn life's hardest lessons into gentle wisdom that a child could understand and carry forward. "People's laughter can't dent your heart unless you let it," he said gently, using his thumb to wipe away her tears. "Sometimes folks laugh because they don't understand what real strength looks like, or because they're hurting inside themselves and don't know how else to feel better." Emma sniffled, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes that reminded him so much of Lisa it took his breath away. "But our truck isn't bad, Daddy. She takes good care of us. She gets us where we need to go." "That's absolutely right," Jake agreed, standing up and brushing off his knees before offering his hand. "Rosie's been with us through everything, hasn't she? She's family. And sometimes the best adventures happen when we take a different path than we planned." Emma slipped her small hand into his calloused one, bending to pick up her basket with the other. "You mean we can still go to the market? How about we walk today?" Jake suggested, pointing down the tree-lined sidewalk that led toward town. "It's such a beautiful morning for it. We might see things we'd miss if we drove. Maybe find some pretty leaves for your collection. Or wave hello to Mrs. Patterson's cat." Emma's face brightened slightly at the prospect of an adventure. They set off down the sidewalk together, their footsteps falling into an easy, comfortable rhythm. Jake pointed out the changing leaves on the towering maple trees, their brilliant reds and golds creating a canopy of natural beauty overhead. He told her stories about the different houses they passed, making up silly tales about the garden gnomes and wind chimes that made Emma giggle despite her earlier tears. Gradually, as they walked and talked, Emma's natural resilience reasserted itself. Her smile returned, tentative at first, then growing brighter with each step. By the time they reached the bustling farmer's market, she was chattering excitedly about which apples would make the best pie and whether Mr. Wilson's bees were getting ready for winter. The market welcomed them with its usual warmth, genuine smiles, friendly greetings, and the kind of community spirit that reminded Jake why he'd chosen to build his life in this small town despite its challenges. Emma sampled apple slices, helped an elderly vendor arrange pumpkins, and charmed everyone with her earnest questions about farming and beekeeping. Later that afternoon, after they'd walked home with their arms full of market treasures, Jake returned to the truck with his toolbox. He worked methodically in the driveway, his hands moving with the practiced ease of decades spent fixing things that others might have given up on. The problem turned out to be exactly what he'd suspected: a loose battery connection corroded from age and weather. Simple enough to fix with some cleaning and tightening, but the morning's humiliation still sat heavy in his chest like an undigested meal. As he cleaned his tools and organized his workbench, Jake's mind wandered back to the conversation he'd overheard at Benson Motors. The memory of Frank Benson and Victor Rowe discussing their plan to cut corners on safety inspections made his stomach turn with a mixture of anger and disgust. He thought about all the families who trusted Benson Motors, who saved for months or even years to buy what they believed were safe, reliable vehicles for their loved ones. The sound of Emma's voice, humming a half-remembered lullaby, drifted through the open garage door as she watered her mother's flower garden with careful attention. Jake watched her for a moment through the doorway, noting how gently she handled the watering can, how she spoke softly to each plant, as if they were old friends. Lisa's influence lived on in their daughter's tender heart and careful hands. He remembered Lisa's words about teaching Emma to stand up for what's right, no matter the personal cost. Integrity isn't convenient. She'd once told him during one of their late-night conversations about raising a child in an increasingly complicated world. But it's the only thing that lets you sleep peacefully at night. That evening, after Emma was safely tucked into bed with her favorite stuffed rabbit and a chapter from their current bedtime story, Jake sat at the small wooden desk in his bedroom. The piece of furniture had been Lisa's, inherited from her grandmother, and still held faint traces of her favorite lavender perfume in its drawers. His ancient computer hummed to life with the grinding persistence of outdated technology, the screen casting a pale blue glow across his weathered face. For a long moment, he simply stared at the blank email form, his fingers hovering uncertainly over the keyboard. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. This anonymous tip to the local newspaper could very well cost him his job at the dealership, the best-paying, most stable work he'd had in years. The income that was finally allowing him to catch up on bills and maybe even start a small college fund for Emma. But every time he wavered, the image of families driving unsafe vehicles rose in his mind. He pictured other fathers like himself, trusting that the expensive vehicles they'd purchased would protect their children. He imagined accidents that could be prevented, lives that could be saved, if someone just had the courage to speak up. Jake began typing slowly, his calloused fingers moving deliberately across the keys. He detailed exactly what he'd overheard in Frank Benson's office, being careful to stick strictly to the facts without embellishment or assumption. The letter to the local newspaper's anonymous tip line was clear and concise, written in the straightforward style that Lisa had helped him develop during their years together. When he finished, Jake read the message over 3 times, checking for accuracy and clarity. His hand trembled slightly as he moved the mouse cursor to hover over the send button. The small arrow seemed to pulse with the weight of consequence, representing a point of no return that would change everything. He thought of Emma sleeping peacefully in the next room, trusting him to make the right choices for their family. He thought of Lisa, and what she would say if she were sitting beside him now. He thought of all the unknown families whose safety might depend on this single act of courage. With a deep breath that seemed to draw strength from somewhere beyond himself, Jake closed his eyes and clicked send. The email disappeared into the digital ether with a soft whoosh, carrying with it both his hopes for justice and his fears for the future. Whatever came next, Jake knew he'd be able to look his daughter in the eye and tell her he'd done the right thing. That had to be enough. The morning paper landed on doorsteps across Maple Grove with a thud that seemed to echo through the quiet streets. Jake sat at his small kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside him as he read the bold headline, "Dealership under fire for safety shortcuts." His weathered hands trembled slightly as he held the newspaper, scanning the detailed exposé that laid bare everything he'd discovered. Emma padded into the kitchen in her fuzzy socks, still in her pajamas, with clouds printed on them. Her eyes went straight to the paper in Jake's hands, and she leaned against his shoulder to peek at the words. "Daddy," she said softly, her voice carrying a wisdom beyond her years. "Did you do the right thing?" Jake set the paper down and pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Always, sweetheart. Sometimes doing the right thing is the hardest thing, but that's what makes it matter most." An hour later, Jake pulled into the dealership's parking lot. Already, news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the morning sky like metal trees. Reporters clutched microphones and notepads, swarming around anyone who approached the building. Inside, the usually pristine showroom crackled with tension. Employees huddled in corners, whispering behind computer screens and coffee cups. Victor Rowe's voice boomed from Frank's office, sharp with anger. "It had to be him. He's the only one who knew about those conversations." Victor stormed out of the office, his expensive suit wrinkled from agitation. His finger jabbed the air in Jake's direction. You did this, didn't you, Harlow?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Jake, who stood straight and tall despite the weight of their stares. Frank emerged from his office, his face ashen. "Jake," Frank said, his voice tight with controlled fury, "come in here, now." The office door closed behind them with a soft click. Frank's desk, usually immaculate, was covered in papers and printouts of the article. He gripped the back of his leather chair, knuckles white. "Did you do this?" Frank asked, each word measured and heavy. Jake met his gaze steadily. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the silver in both men's hair. "The truth had to come out, Frank. Those shortcuts could have gotten people killed." Frank's face flushed red. "You had no right. This is my business, my family's legacy. And those are people's lives," Jake said quietly. "I couldn't stay silent. Get out." Frank's voice shook. "You're fired. Clean out your toolbox and leave." "Now." Jake nodded once, dignity intact. He walked through the Zun showroom, past the whispers and stares, to his workstation. His old metal toolbox, the same one he'd carried through 20 years of fixing cars, waited on his bench. Each tool inside had a story, marked with memories of problems solved and vehicles restored. As he lifted the box, its familiar weight settled in his arms like an old friend. The walk across the showroom felt longer than usual, but Jake kept his head high. Through the glass doors, he could see the reporters still milling about, hungry for a story. He slipped out the side entrance, avoiding their cameras and questions. His truck sat waiting in the employee lot, or what used to be the employee lot. The morning sun caught its dents and scratches, battle scars from years of faithful service. The drive home was quiet. Jake turned off the radio, letting his thoughts settle like dust after a storm. He pulled into his driveway just as the school bus was dropping Emma off. She saw his truck and broke into a run, her backpack bouncing against her spine. Jake stepped out just in time to catch her as she launched herself into his arms. "You're home early," she said, then pulled back to study his face, with those knowing eyes that reminded him so much of Lisa. Understanding dawned in her expression. "They found out it was you?" Jake nodded, setting her down gently. "Yeah, sunshine. They did." Emma wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. "It's okay," she whispered. "We still got us." Jake swallowed hard, running a hand over her hair. In that moment, she sounded so much like her mother, it made his heart ache. That evening, after Emma was tucked in bed, Jake drove to the lake. It was their spot, his and Lisa's, where they'd spent countless summer evenings planning their future. The moon hung low and full over the water, painting a silver path across its surface. He parked near the shore, where his truck's reflection merged with the starlit water. The autumn air carried the scent of pine needles and approaching winter. Jake stepped out, his boots crunching on gravel, and walked to the water's edge. "We'll find a way, Lisa," he whispered to the gentle waves. Somehow, the water lapped at the shore, its ripples catching moonlight like scattered diamonds. Above him, Stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unchanged by the day's events. The old truck's reflection wavered in the water, a faithful shadow in the night. The morning sunlight crept through the worn curtains of the Harlow kitchen as Jake stood at the stove, flipping pancakes. His movements were mechanical, his mind elsewhere as he glanced at the stack of unopened envelopes on the counter. Bills. They seemed to multiply overnight, their white edges gleaming like accusing fingers. "Morning, Daddy!" Emma's cheerful voice cut through his worries. She bounced into the kitchen in her favorite blue dress, her backpack already slung over one shoulder. "Morning, sunshine." Jake managed a warm smile, sliding a Mickey Mouse-shaped pancake onto her plate. "Extra chocolate chips. Just the way you like it." Emma's face lit up, but then fell as she noticed the pile of envelopes. "Are those more bills?" "Don't you worry about those." Jake ruffled her hair. "Your job is to focus on school and being the wonderful girl you are." After dropping Emma off at school, thankfully without any encounters with the Benson kids, Jake began his job search. He'd made a list of every garage and repair shop within driving distance, determined to find something. The first stop was Miller's Auto Shop, on the edge of town. The owner, Tom Miller, had known Jake for years. But as Jake walked in, Tom's usually friendly face was tight with discomfort. "I'm sorry, Jake," Tom said, not quite meeting his eyes. "We're, not hiring right now." The same scene repeated itself throughout the morning. At Carter's garage, "Bad timing, Jake." At Pete's Auto Care, "Just filled our last position yesterday." At Pete's Auto Care, "Downtown Motors. We'll keep your application on file." By noon, Jake's optimism had begun to crack. He sat in his truck outside the last shop, gripping the steering wheel. The whispers and sideways glances followed him everywhere. There goes the whistleblower, the guy who brought down Benson Motors, the snitch. His phone buzzed, a text from Emma's teacher. His heart sank as he read it. During recess, some kids had cornered Emma, taunting her about how her father had ruined everything. Their parents worked at Benson Motors, and now everyone was worried about losing their jobs because of the investigation Jake had triggered. Jake rushed to the school, finding Emma in the counselor's office. Her eyes were red, but she was trying hard to be brave, just like her mother would have been. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Jake said, pulling her into a tight hug. "Tommy said his dad might lose his job because of you," Emma whispered into his shirt. "Did I do something wrong by defending you?" Jake pulled back, looking into her eyes. "Listen to me, Emma. You did nothing wrong, and neither did I. Courage costs something, sweetheart. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, but that doesn't make it any less right." They drove home in silence, the old truck's familiar rattles providing a comforting background noise. Jake's mind raced with worries about their future, but he kept his expression calm for Emma's sake. In the kitchen, Jake surveyed their dwindling pantry. Their usual grocery day was still a few days away, and funds were tight. He spotted some cans of beans and half a loaf of bread. "How about some cowboy dinner?" Jake announced with forced enthusiasm, pulling out the beans and bread. Emma giggled despite her rough day. "Cowboy dinner? Sure thing." Jake winked, popping the beans into a pot. "This here's authentic camp food. Cowboys lived on beans and toast during cattle drives. We're having a genuine Western experience." As they ate their simple meal, Jake told Emma stories about imaginary cowboys and their adventures, making her laugh with silly voices and exaggerated tales. For a little while, they could pretend the day's troubles didn't exist. And then the cowboy said to his horse, Jake drawled in his best Western accent, "Partner, these might be the finest beans this side of the Mississippi." Emma giggled, bean sauce on her chin. "Daddy, you're silly." Later that night, Jake tucked Emma into bed, smoothing her favorite quilt, the one Lisa had made, over her shoulders. Emma clasped her hands together, closing her eyes for her nightly prayer. "Dear God," she began softly, "please help Daddy find people who can see his heart. He's the best daddy in the world, and he always does what's right. Please help other people see that too." She paused, then added, "And please help Tommy's dad keep his job." "Amen." Jake felt a tear slide down his cheek as he whispered, "Amen." He quickly wiped it away before Emma could see, but she caught the motion and reached up to hug him. "Don't be sad, Daddy," she whispered. "God always answers prayers. That's what Mommy used to say. Remember?" Jake nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Your mommy was a very wise woman," he finally managed. "Get some sleep now, sweetheart. I love you." "Love you too, Daddy." Jake stood in Emma's doorway, watching as her breathing evened out into sleep. The moonlight filtered through her window, casting a gentle glow on her face. She looked so much like Lisa in that moment. The same quiet strength, the same pure heart. He quietly closed her door and walked to the kitchen, finally allowing himself to face the stack of bills. As he opened each envelope, the numbers seemed to mock him, but he forced himself to keep going. They would find a way through this. They had to. The clock on the wall ticked steadily as Jake sat at the kitchen table, calculator in hand, trying to make impossible numbers add up to something manageable. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant sound of crickets through the open window. The late morning sun cast long, angular shadows across Jake's yard as he worked on mending the rickety fence that bordered his modest property. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, replacing rotted boards one by one and hammering loose nails back into place with deliberate precision. The old wood creaked and groaned under his touch, the sound reminding him of his own aging joints that protested each morning when he rose from bed. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool autumn air that carried the scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke. The physical labor helped keep his restless mind off the persistent worry that had been gnawing at him like a hungry animal since losing his job at Benson Motors 3 weeks ago. The rhythmic sound of his hammer striking nails created a steady, hypnotic beat that almost drowned out his troubled thoughts about unpaid bills stacking up on his kitchen table, and Emma's disappointed face when he'd told her they couldn't afford new school shoes this month. Each strike of the hammer seemed to echo the questions that haunted his sleepless nights. How long could he make their meager savings last? What would he tell Emma if they had to move to an even smaller place? The fence post wobbled slightly as he worked, much like his confidence in providing for his daughter. The rumble of an approaching vehicle made him pause mid-swing. A sleek silver Mercedes pulled up to his curb with barely a whisper, its polished chrome gleaming in the sunlight and looking strangely out of place on his humble street lined with modest ranch homes and chain-link fences. Jake straightened up slowly, his back protesting the movement as he wiped his calloused hands on his worn jeans. The denim was soft from countless washings, patched in 2 places where Emma had helped him sew on fabric from one of Lisa's old dresses. Grace Benson stepped out of the luxury car with elegant grace, her movements fluid and purposeful. She carried a wicker basket covered with a red and white checkered cloth that fluttered gently in the breeze, and her face wore a gentle, almost apologetic expression that seemed to soften her refined features. Her honey-colored hair was pulled back in a simple but sophisticated style, and her dress was expensive but understated, the kind of quiet wealth that didn't need to shout. "Mrs. Benson," Jake said politely, though confusion creased his sun-weathered brow. He set his hammer down on the fence post and took off his worn baseball cap, running his fingers through his graying hair. He couldn't imagine why Frank Benson's wife would be visiting him, especially after everything that had happened. The last time he'd seen any member of the Benson family, Frank had been escorting him out of the dealership with barely contained fury. "Please, call me Grace," she said, walking up the cracked concrete path to his fence with careful steps. Her heels clicked softly against the uneven pavement that Jake had been meaning to repair for months. The wind rustled her elegant navy dress, and she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a nervous gesture that made her seem more human, less like the untouchable socialite he'd imagined her to be. "I brought you something." She lifted the cloth with gentle hands to reveal fresh-baked rolls that were still warm, their golden crusts perfectly browned, and what looked like homemade chicken soup in mason jars that caught the morning light. The aroma hit him immediately. Yeast and butter from the bread, rich herbs and vegetables from the soup. His stomach responded with an embarrassing rumble that he hoped she hadn't heard. He hadn't eaten much beyond coffee and toast that morning, saving the better food for Emma's lunchbox. Jake's pride wanted to refuse, the stubborn independence that had carried him through military service and widowhood rising up, like a shield. But the thought of Emma's face lighting up at the sight of fresh bread, the way her eyes would sparkle when she tasted something made with love instead of stretched from necessity, made him hesitate. "That's very kind, but you don't need to." "I want to thank you," Grace interrupted softly, her voice carrying a warmth that caught him off guard. Her eyes met his with unexpected sincerity, and he saw something there he hadn't expected. Respect, maybe even admiration. "What you did, exposing those unsafe practices, it was right. Even if it hurt our family's reputation in the short term, you probably saved lives. Real lives, Jake. Families who will never know they have you to thank for coming home safe." Jake's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension he'd been carrying for weeks, easing just a fraction, though he remained cautious. Trust didn't come easily anymore, not after being betrayed by people he'd thought were friends. "Your husband might not see it that way." Grace's lips curved in a knowing smile that held both sadness and understanding. "Frank. He's been tossing and turning every night since you left. I hear him pacing the floors at 3 in the morning, standing at the window, looking out at nothing. He won't admit it, but he's torn between being angry and, well, admiring what you did. It takes real courage to stand up for what's right, especially when it costs you everything you've worked for." She reached into her basket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, its edges sharp and official-looking. "This came to our house by mistake. The mail carrier mixed up the addresses. It's from the local Veterans Committee." She handed him the letter, and their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange. Her skin was soft, manicured, so different from his work-roughened hands. "They're having a meeting about community outreach for unemployed veterans. They'd like you to attend." Jake took the envelope, turning it over in his calloused hands. With reverence. The Veterans of Foreign Wars seal was stamped in the corner in deep blue ink, bringing back a flood of memories from his service days. The brotherhood, the shared purpose, the certainty that came from fighting for something bigger than yourself. He'd kept in touch with some of his old unit through Christmas cards and occasional phone calls, but hadn't been active in veterans affairs lately. He'd been too busy trying to keep food on the table and a roof over Emma's head, too proud to admit he might need help himself. "I don't know," he said hesitantly, his thumb tracing the raised edges of the seal. "With everything that's happened, people talk in this town. They might not want someone like me representing them. Sometimes good men just need reminding they're not alone in this world," Grace said softly, her voice carrying the weight of understanding born from her own struggles. She'd seen what pride could do to a family, how it could isolate and destroy, even when it meant to protect. She placed the basket of food carefully on top of the fence post, arranging it so it wouldn't tip. "There are more people on your side than you might think, Jake. More than you know." The sincerity in her voice touched something deep inside him, something that had been buried under layers of hurt and disappointment. It made his throat tight with unexpected emotion, the kind that came when someone saw past your failures to the person you were trying to be. He nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak for a long moment. Grace turned to leave, but paused at his gate, her hand resting on the metal latch that squeaked when it moved. "Emma's a lovely girl," she added, her voice growing even softer. "She defended you quite strongly to my boys the other day at the grocery store. Told them her daddy was a hero who saved people, and that they should be ashamed for laughing at someone who served his country. You've raised her well, Jake. Lisa would be proud." The mention of his wife's name hit him like a physical blow, but not an unwelcome one. It had been so long since someone had spoken of Lisa with kindness, acknowledging that she had existed, that she had mattered. Grace must have seen the pain flicker across his face, because her expression grew even more gentle. Jake watched as Grace walked back to her car, her heels clicking against the sidewalk in a rhythm that seemed to match his suddenly hopeful heartbeat. The Mercedes pulled away smoothly, its engine purring with expensive, quiet, leaving him standing by his half-mended fence with the letter clutched in his hand and the basket of food beside him like a promise that better days might come. He looked down at the envelope again, running his thumb over the raised seal one more time. The paper was thick, official, real. Hope flickered in his chest, small but steady, like a candle flame in the darkness that refused to be extinguished. Maybe Grace was right. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he'd thought. Maybe, just maybe, there were still people in this world who believed in doing the right thing, even when it came at a cost. The fence could wait a little longer. Right now, he had a letter to read and a future to consider. The community center buzzed with warm conversation as Jake pushed open the heavy double doors. The familiar scent of cheap coffee and old wood floors brought him back to his army days. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a soft glow on rows of metal folding chairs where veterans of different ages gathered in small groups. Jake stood at the entrance for a moment, taking in the scene. Some men wore their old unit patches on worn jackets, while others dressed in civilian clothes that couldn't quite hide their military bearing. A few nodded in his direction, the silent acknowledgement of shared experience. Jake Harlow, a tall man with silver hair, stepped forward, hand extended. "I'm Bill Matthews. We spoke on the phone. Welcome to the Thursday night crew." Jake shook his hand, noting the firm grip. "Thanks for having me." "Coffee's awful, but the company's good." Bill chuckled, leading Jake to a corner where several older vets sat sharing stories. "Fellows, this here's Jake. Army mechanic, served 2 tours." The men made room in their circle, and Jake eased into an empty chair. Within minutes, the conversation flowed easily. War stories mixed with jokes about military life, the kind only veterans would understand. For the first time in weeks, Jake felt his shoulders relax. "So you're the miracle worker from Benson Motors," one of the men said, his name tag reading Mike. "Heard you could fix anything with wheels." Jake shifted in his chair, just doing what needed doing. "That's exactly why we wanted you here," Bill interrupted, pulling up another chair. "The council's been working on something. We've got funding for a veterans support program, teaching basic car maintenance, helping with repairs. We need someone who knows their stuff to help design it." Jake's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "You're offering me a job?" "Contract position to start," Bill explained, his eyes twinkling. "But it could grow. Lord knows there are enough vets around here who could use the help." Before Jake could respond, a murmur went through the room. Frank Benson stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit among the worn jeans and work shirts. The room grew quiet as he made his way toward Jake. Frank stopped a few feet away, his usually confident posture somehow smaller. "Jake," he said quietly, "got a minute?" The other veterans tactfully drifted away, leaving them alone in the corner. Jake gestured to the empty chair beside him. Frank sat down heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, "about what happened, about who I used to be when I started the dealership." He paused, meeting Jake's eyes. "You were right. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of who I was." Jake remained silent, watching the internal struggle play across Frank's face. "My father," Frank continued, his voice rough with emotion. "He was a mechanic too, worked honest hours, never cut corners. He'd be ashamed of what I almost let happen." He extended his hand to Jake. "I'm sorry. For everything." Jake studied Frank's face for a long moment before accepting the handshake. "We all lose our way sometimes." "That's why I'm here," Frank said, straightening up. "I want to make it right. The dealership's starting a new initiative. Free repairs for veterans' families. Basic maintenance, emergency work, whatever they need. I want you to run it." Jake blinked in surprise. "Frank, no pressure to decide right now," Frank added quickly. "But the offer's there. You've got something special, Jake. The way you work with people, the way you see what needs fixing. And I don't just mean cars." They talked details for a while longer, the tension gradually easing between them. Other veterans drifted back, adding their thoughts about what the community needed. Ideas flowed freely, and Jake found himself getting excited about the possibilities. The meeting ran late into the evening. When Jake finally headed home, the stars were bright in the clear autumn sky. He pulled into his driveway, noticing Emma's bedroom light still on despite the late hour. He found her curled up in bed with a book, fighting sleep. Her eyes opened as he kissed her forehead. "Daddy," she mumbled sleepily. "Hey, pumpkin," he whispered, smoothing her hair. "Guess what? We're back on our feet." Emma smiled drowsily, already drifting back to sleep. Jake tucked the blanket around her shoulders, his heart full. Through her window, he could see his old truck in the driveway. Still dented, still rusty, but somehow looking different under the starlight. Like it was just waiting for the next chapter to begin. The autumn sun painted golden stripes across the dealership's polished floor as Jake demonstrated the proper way to check a transmission. His weathered hands moved with practiced grace over the engine parts, while Frank's teenage sons and their friends watched intently. The morning light caught the silver in Jake's hair, and his eyes crinkled at the corners as he explained each step. "See, boys, every bolt tells a story," Jake said, pointing to a worn gasket. "This here shows years of faithful service. Treat these machines with respect, and they'll return the favor." Frank stood nearby, arms crossed and nodding approvingly. The dealership had transformed in recent weeks. Gone were the shortcuts and hasty fixes. In their place stood a commitment to quality that made Jake proud to be part of the team. Tommy Benson, Frank's oldest son, cleared his throat. His usual cockiness was replaced by something softer, more uncertain. "Mr. Harlow? We wanted to say something." The other boys shuffled their feet, exchanging glances. Jake wiped his hands on a shop rag, giving them his full attention. "We were real jerks about your truck," Tommy continued, his face reddening. "Making fun of it and all. It wasn't right." "Yeah," added Mike, Tommy's younger brother. "Dad told us how you learned mechanics in the Army, how you've been taking care of folks' cars for years. We were stupid." Jake's expression remained gentle. "Takes courage to admit when you're wrong, boys. That's worth more than any fancy car." He extended his hand, and they shook it one by one, relief washing over their faces. Throughout the morning, Jake guided them through basic maintenance procedures. Their eagerness to learn touched him. These weren't the same smirking teens who'd mocked his old Ford. They asked questions, took notes, and listened with genuine interest as he shared stories from his years of experience. During their lunch break, Jake worked on his own truck. The familiar vehicle sat in a corner of the shop, its worn paint gradually giving way to fresh coats of deep blue. He'd been restoring it piece by piece, teaching the boys along the way. "Daddy!" Emma's voice rang out across the shop. She bounded in, carrying a brown paper bag, her braids bouncing. "I made you lunch." Jake caught her in a hug, lifting her off her feet. "Well, if it isn't my favorite chef, what's on the menu today?" Emma proudly pulled out carefully wrapped sandwiches and homemade cookies. "PB&J with the crusts cut off, just how you like it." She beamed at the gathering crowd of mechanics who'd wandered over, drawn by the commotion. "Your dad's been teaching us everything he knows," Tommy told Emma. "He's the best mechanic in town." Emma's smile grew wider. "I know," she said simply, and Jake felt his heart swell. After lunch, it was time for the moment they'd all been waiting for. Jake slid behind the wheel of his restored truck, now gleaming under the afternoon sun. The fresh paint sparkled, chrome trim shone like mirrors, and even the bed liner looked brand new. But the true test would be under the hood. A small crowd gathered as Jake turned the key. The engine roared to life with a smooth, powerful purr that echoed through the shop. Cheers and applause erupted from the workers. Frank clapped Jake on the shoulder, genuine pride in his eyes. "Now that's what I call a resurrection," Frank announced. "From rust bucket to showroom quality." As the sun began to set, the dealership's parking lot filled with people gathering for the official launch of the Harlow Heroes initiative. Folding chairs lined the asphalt, and someone had strung up white lights between the lampposts. Jake's restored truck sat prominently displayed, a symbol of the program's mission. Mayor Wilson stood at the makeshift podium, praising the dealership's commitment to helping veterans. When it was Jake's turn to speak, he shuffled forward, uncomfortable with the attention, but determined to honor the moment. "Integrity isn't just about doing the right thing," he began, his voice steady and clear. "It's about believing in something bigger than yourself. This program isn't about me. It's about serving those who served, about community, about second chances." He paused, looking out at the faces before him. Sometimes the strongest vehicles are the ones that have weathered the most storms. Same goes for people. Thank you all for believing in this vision. The crowd burst into applause, punctuated by laughter and a few misty eyes. Frank's boys led the standing ovation. their faces shining with newfound respect. Emma sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Later, as Jake drove home with Emma beside him, the stars twinkled overhead like scattered diamonds. His old truck hummed contentedly beneath them, each perfectly tuned cylinder a testament to persistence and care. The road ahead stretched clear and bright, and for the first time in a long while, Jake felt completely at peace. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," she whispered. Jake smiled, feeling the quiet rightness of the moment settle around them like a familiar blanket. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness, guiding them home under the vast autumn sky. The setting sun painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples as Jake guided his restored pickup down the winding highway. The old truck hummed contentedly, running smoother than it had in years thanks to the recent repairs. Country music drifted softly from the radio, an old Merle Haggard tune about better days ahead. Jake smiled, drumming his fingers on the worn steering wheel. The evening air flowing through the open windows carried the crisp scent of autumn leaves. After finishing up paperwork at the shop, he was looking forward to getting home to Emma. She'd promised to make her world-famous peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for dinner. As he approached the highway overlook, that scenic stretch where the road curved gently around Miller's Hill, something caught his eye. A dark plume of smoke rose against the darkening sky, maybe a quarter-mile ahead. Jake's veteran instincts kicked in immediately. He leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The smoke thickened as he drew closer. Then he saw it. A luxury SUV had veered off the road and slammed into the guardrail. Flames were already licking up from under the hood. Jake's heart nearly stopped. He recognized that vehicle, the metallic blue paint, the custom wheels. It was Frank Benson's new Navigator. Without hesitation, Jake yanked the wheel hard, sending his truck sliding onto the gravel shoulder. He grabbed the old fire extinguisher he kept behind his seat, a habit from his military days, and sprinted toward the wreck. The heat hit him like a wall. Through the tinted windows, he could make out several figures inside. Tommy and Ryan Benson were in there, along with their friends. The same boys who had once mocked his old truck were now trapped as flames crept toward the passenger compartment. "Hold on!" Jake shouted. He tried the door handles, but they were jammed from the impact. The boys inside were stirring weakly. Smoke was starting to fill the cabin. Jake ran back to his truck, threw it into gear, and did something that would have seemed crazy any other time. He deliberately drove straight toward the burning SUV. With a grinding crunch of metal, he positioned his pickup close enough to use as a platform. Shrugging off his heavy work jacket, Jake wrapped it around his fist and smashed the rear window. Glass shattered inward as thick smoke billowed out. He could hear coughing from inside. "Come on, boys, this way!" He reached in through the broken window, grabbing the first teenager he could reach, Tommy Benson. The boy was dazed but conscious. Jake hauled him out and set him on shaky feet away from the wreck. The flames were spreading faster now. Jake's lungs burned as he went back for the next boy. Ryan Benson came next, then two of their friends. Each time Jake plunged back into the choking smoke, his skin screaming from the heat. He heard a sharp pop. The fire had reached his own truck's engine. But there was still one more boy inside the SUV, slumped unconscious in the far back seat. Jake didn't hesitate. He crawled deeper into the burning vehicle, ignoring the searing pain in his hands as he touched hot metal. The unconscious teenager, Kevin Matthews, the one who'd always led the teasing, was a dead weight in Jake's arms. But with strength born of desperation, Jake managed to drag him through the broken window. They had barely cleared the wreck when Jake's faithful old truck erupted in flames. The gas tank exploded with a deafening boom, showering the area with burning debris. Jake threw himself over Kevin, shielding the boy with his own body. In the distance, sirens wailed. Jake tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. His hands were a mess of burns and cuts. The world started to spin as shock set in. "Emma," he whispered, thinking of his daughter waiting at home. Then everything went black as he collapsed beside the boys he'd just saved. The last thing he heard was the screech of ambulance tires on pavement and the shouts of approaching paramedics. Morning sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Outside, news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal flowers. Reporters clutched microphones and coffee cups, their voices creating a constant buzz as they delivered updates to their cameras. The headlines scrolled across every local station. Veteran saves local teens from fiery wreck. Nurses paused at their stations to watch the coverage, shaking their heads in amazement at the grainy cell phone footage showing Jake's old truck charging through the flames. In the hospital's waiting room, families huddled around small TVs mounted on the walls. They watched as emergency. Workers described how Jake had risked everything to save the trapped teenagers. Never seen anything like it, one firefighter testified. That man's truck was his livelihood, but he didn't hesitate for a second. On the third floor, Jake lay quietly in his hospital bed, his hands wrapped in white gauze. The steady beep of monitors filled the room. Burns marked his arms and face, but the doctors had assured everyone he would recover. The morning light touched his silver hair, making it gleam against the stark white pillowcase. The door opened softly. Grace Benson entered first, her eyes red from crying. Frank followed, looking older somehow, the weight of gratitude and shame visible in his stooped shoulders. They approached Jake's bed carefully, as if afraid to disturb the peace of the room. "Jake," Grace whispered, reaching for his unbandaged hand. "Oh, Jake." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she squeezed his fingers gently. Frank stood at the foot of the bed, his usual confidence replaced by raw emotion. "You saved my boys," he said, his voice cracking. "You saved my sons." He moved closer, taking Jake's other hand carefully between both of his own. "I'll never forget this. Never." Jake tried to smile, wincing slightly at the movement. "Anyone would have done the same," he said softly. "No," Frank shook his head firmly. "They wouldn't have. You drove straight into those flames. Your truck." "Just metal and parts," Jake murmured. "Can't compare to those kids." The door opened again, and the Benson boys shuffled in. Their faces were marked with cuts and bruises, but they were alive. Wonderfully, miraculously alive. They hung back near the wall, suddenly shy, their usual bravado gone. "Mr. Harlow," the older boy started, then stopped, swallowing hard. We wanted to say, "Thank you," his brother finished quietly, "for saving our lives." Jake looked at them, seeing not the teenagers who had once mocked his truck, but just kids, scared, humbled kids, who had faced death and survived. "Come here," he said gently. They approached the bed, and Jake could see tears in their eyes. "We're so sorry," one whispered. "For everything. The way we treated you and Emma. That's all past now," Jake assured them. "What matters is, you're safe." Grace dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "The whole town's talking about what you did, Jake." "They're calling you a hero." Jake shook his head slightly. "Don't need any of that. Just glad I was there when needed." Frank cleared his throat. "The dealership. We're setting up a fund. For your medical bills, a new truck." "Frank," Jake started to protest, but Frank held up his hand. "Please, let us do this. It's the least we can do." The morning light had grown stronger now, warming the room. A nurse came in to check Jake's vitals, smiling at the gathered family. "Your daughter's here," she told Jake. "Should I send her in?" Jake's face brightened. "Please." Emma appeared in the doorway, her backpack still on her shoulders from school. She hesitated for just a moment, then rushed to her father's side. The Bensons stepped back, giving them space. "Daddy," she whispered, carefully taking his hand. Her eyes were wide, taking in the bandages, the machines, but there was no fear in them, only love and pride. "You're my hero," Jake smiled faintly, squeezing her small fingers. "No, baby girl, just your dad." The morning sun caught Emma's hair, creating a halo of light around her head as she leaned over to kiss his cheek. In that moment, the beeping machine seemed to fade away, and the pain of his burns lessened. The room was filled with nothing but love, the love of a father for his daughter, the gratitude of parents whose children had been saved, and the quiet redemption of those who had learned the true measure of a man's worth. The news crews outside continued their reports, sharing the story of heroism and sacrifice. But here, in this quiet room, surrounded by the people whose lives he had touched, Jake Harlow wasn't thinking about headlines or heroics. He was simply holding his daughter's hand, thankful for another day to be her father. Jake sat on the edge of his hospital bed, grimacing as the physical therapist gently stretched his bandaged fingers. The morning light filtered through the window, warming his face. His hands felt stiff and tender beneath the white gauze. But determination burned in his eyes. "Good, Mr. Harlow," the therapist encouraged. Just like that. Small movements. Emma perched cross-legged in the visitor's chair beside him, a stack of envelopes piled high in her lap. Her ponytail bobbed as she sorted through them, picking one with a bright stamp. "Here's another one from Kansas City. Daddy," she said, carefully opening the envelope. Her voice filled with pride as she read, "Dear Mr. Harlow, I saw you on the news. My son is a veteran too. What you did reminds me that there are still real heroes in this world." Jake listened, blinking back tears. The letters had been arriving by the hundreds, from veterans, from parents, from complete strangers touched by his actions. The hospital staff had to bring in extra bins just to hold them all. "Take a break, sweetheart," he said softly. "Your voice must be tired." Emma shook her head, already reaching for another letter. "I like reading them. People say such nice things about you now." The physical therapist smiled as she wrapped fresh bandages around Jake's hands. "Your daughter's quite the dedicated nurse, Mr. Harlow." "Takes after her mother," Jake said quietly, watching Emma's careful movements. Lisa had been a nurse, the best kind, gentle but strong, just like their daughter was becoming. Through the open door, they could hear excited voices from the hallway. The morning news was still running stories about the rescue. Local churches had started prayer circles for Jake's recovery. The Methodist Women's Group was organizing a casserole drive. The high school shop class was planning a benefit car wash. Mrs. Chen from the corner grocery shuffled in, carrying a paper bag filled with fresh fruit. "For strength," she said, patting Jake's shoulder. She had barely spoken 2 words to him before, but now her eyes shone with warmth. More visitors trickled in throughout the morning. The veterans group arrived in force, filling the room with hearty voices and firm handshakes for Emma. Their leader, Colonel Matthews, carried an official-looking envelope. "Jake," he announced, "we've nominated you for the Civilian Service Medal of Valor. The ceremony's next month in Washington." Jake started to protest, but Emma squeezed his arm. "You deserve it, Daddy." The physical therapist had him practice gripping a soft rubber ball, working through the discomfort. Through the window, they could see a group of teenagers setting up tables in the parking lot for a fundraiser. The Benson boys were among them, their usual swagger replaced by purposeful determination. "Your truck fund is growing fast," Colonel Matthews said. "Whole town's pitching in." "Though I heard you tried to redirect the money to veteran scholarships?" Jake nodded. "Seems right. There are folks who need it more." "Always thinking of others," a familiar voice said from the doorway. Grace Benson stood there, holding a covered dish. "But sometimes, Jake Harlow, you need to let others think of you." The afternoon passed in a blur of visitors, exercises, and Emma's steady voice reading letters. By evening, the room was filled with flowers, cards, and the lingering scent of home-cooked meals brought by well-wishers. As sunset approached, Jake insisted on taking a short walk. Emma helped him into a light jacket, careful of his bandaged hands. Together, they made their way to the hospital's small balcony. The sky was painted in brilliant oranges and pinks, the town's buildings silhouetted against the fading light. From here, Jake could see the high school where the fundraiser tables still stood, the church where prayers were being said, the auto shop where his students were keeping things running. The same town that had once whispered behind his back now lifted him up. The same people who had avoided his eyes now sought him out, not because he had wanted recognition, but because he had simply done what was right, what Lisa would have expected of him. Emma leaned against the railing beside him, her small hand finding his arm. The evening breeze ruffled her hair, so like her mother's. Jake looked out at the skyline. at the community that had finally learned to see with their hearts instead of their eyes. His voice was barely a whisper as he spoke to the sunset. "Guess we did all right, Lisa." The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings as Jake's old pickup borrowed from a neighbor pulled into Benson Motors' parking lot. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the gleaming new sign above the dealership, Home of the Harlow Heroes Initiative. Emma squeezed his hand, her small fingers careful around his healing burns. "Look, Daddy, your name's up there, big as anything." Jake swallowed hard, taking in the sight of the transformed dealership. Where pristine luxury cars once dominated the lot, a mix of vehicles now stood ready for repair, everything from weathered farm trucks to family sedans. A group of veterans in work clothes chatted near the service bay, coffee cups in hand. Frank Benson stood at the entrance, dressed not in his usual suit, but in workers' overalls. His sons, Tommy and Ryan, flanked him, wearing matching blue uniforms with volunteer patches. The change in their demeanor was striking. Gone were the sneers and entitled postures, replaced by genuine smiles and straight backs. As Jake stepped out of the truck, applause erupted from the gathered crowd. He ducked his head, still uncomfortable with attention, but Emma tugged him forward proudly. The morning sun caught the healing pink skin of his hands as he raised one in a modest wave. "Ladies and gentlemen," Frank's voice boomed through the microphone, "today marks more than just a new chapter for Benson Motors. It marks the day we formally dedicate ourselves to serving those who've served us." He paused, his voice thickening. "And it wouldn't be possible without the man who showed us what real courage looks like." Jake stood quietly as Frank approached him, microphone lowered. The businessman's eyes were bright with emotion. "Jake," Frank continued, his voice carrying across the hushed lot, "I owe you more than just my son's lives. I owe you an apology. In front of everyone here, I want to say I was wrong. Wrong about cutting corners. Wrong about what success really means. And wrong about you." Tommy and Ryan stepped forward, each carrying a plaque. The older boy's hands trembled slightly as he held it out. "Mr. Harlow," Tommy said, his voice cracking, "we're sorry for how we treated you. You taught us that real strength isn't about what you own. It's about what you're willing to risk for others." Emma beamed as Jake accepted the plaque with bandaged hands. The metal surface caught the light, revealing the words, "In honor of Jake Harlow, where integrity meets service." The ceremony continued as Frank outlined the initiative's mission, providing affordable repairs for veterans, training programs for their children, and emergency assistance for families in need. Jake watched as his own story of struggle and redemption transformed into something bigger than himself. The Benson boys led tours of the renovated service area, proudly showing off the weekend volunteer program they'd help organize. Veterans gathered around Jake, sharing stories and handshakes, their presence a reminder that he was never truly alone. Grace Benson approached last, her eyes twinkling with joy and unshed tears. In her hands, she held a small black box. "The community wanted to do something special," she said softly. "Everyone contributed, the churches, the schools, even the children with their piggy banks." Jake's throat tightened as she opened the box, revealing a set of keys with a familiar blue oval logo. "It's parked around back," Grace continued, pressing the keys into his palm. "Brand new, fully loaded, and paid in full. You've earned it, Jake. More than earned it." Jake stared at the keys, unable to speak. Emma bounced on her toes beside him, her eyes wide with excitement. "Can we see it, Daddy? Please." Grace led them around the building, where a gleaming Ford F-150 waited. Its deep blue paint reflected the sky like a mirror, and chrome accents sparkled in the sunlight. On the driver's door, a small decal read, "From your Maple Grove family." Jake ran his healing fingers over the smooth metal, remembering his old truck, the one that had carried him through years of struggle, the one he'd sacrificed to save the Benson boys. This new vehicle wasn't just transportation, it was a symbol of how far they'd all come. Emma climbed into the passenger seat, her face glowing with pride as she watched her father take it all in. Grace stepped back, giving them space to absorb the moment. "You've earned it," she repeated softly, her words carrying the weight of genuine gratitude. "Welcome home, Jake." The morning sun painted golden streaks across the hood of the brand-new Ford F-150, its red paint so bright it looked like it was on fire. Jake ran his bandaged hand gently over the steering wheel, still unable to believe this gleaming machine was really his. Emma bounced in the passenger seat, her excitement making the whole truck seem to vibrate with joy. "It even has that new car smell, Daddy." She took a deep breath, grinning. "And look at all these buttons," Jake chuckled, remembering how his old truck had exactly 2 buttons that still worked: the hazard lights and the horn. This vehicle had more technology than he knew what to do with, but he'd learn. The leather seats creaked softly as he adjusted his position, everything feeling foreign yet wonderful. "Ready for our first drive, Pumpkin?" Jake asked, starting the engine. It purred to life, nothing like the asthmatic growl of his old pickup. "Can we—" Emma hesitated, clutching the drawing she'd made in her lap. "Can we go see Mom first?" Jake's heart squeezed in his chest. "Of course we can, sweetheart." They drove through town, past maple trees, shedding their red and gold leaves. The truck handled like a dream, smooth and steady. People waved as they passed, the same folks who'd once whispered and stared, now smiled warmly. Jake still wasn't used to that part. The cemetery sat on a gentle hill overlooking Maple Grove. Jake parked near the iron gates, and they walked together down the familiar path. Fallen leaves crunched beneath their feet, and the autumn air carried the sweet, sharp scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys. Lisa's headstone stood under an old oak tree, its gray surface clean and well-tended. Jake always made sure of that. Emma knelt beside it, carefully placing her drawing against the stone. The paper fluttered in the breeze, a child's artwork showing their old truck surrounded by hearts and rainbows, with "Home on Wheels" written in careful letters across the top. "Hi, Mom," Emma said softly, touching the cool granite. "Daddy's a hero now." "Well, he always was, but now everybody knows it." Jake stood behind her, his throat tight with emotion. The morning sun filtered through the oak's branches, dappling the ground with light and shadow. He thought about all the times he'd come here alone, seeking guidance in his darkest moments. "Thank you, Lisa," he whispered, his voice rough, "for watching over us, for helping me stay strong when it would have been easier to give up." He placed his hand on Emma's shoulder. "For giving me this amazing little girl who reminds me so much of you." Emma looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears and love. "Mom would be proud, huh?" Jake nodded, swallowing hard. "She would, baby. She'd say we kept rolling, no matter the bumps." They stood there together, the autumn wind rustling through the oak leaves above them. Jake remembered Lisa's favorite saying, "Life's road isn't always smooth, but that's what makes the journey worth remembering." She'd been right about that, just like she'd been right about so many things. Emma straightened the drawing one last time, making sure it wouldn't blow away. She'd weighted the corners with small stones she'd collected on their walk. The paper caught a shaft of sunlight, making the rainbow she'd drawn seem to glow. "Ready to head home?" Jake asked gently, after a few more quiet moments. Emma nodded, taking his hand. They walked back to the truck together, their footsteps matching pace. Behind them, the sun continued its slow dance across Lisa's headstone, warming the granite and making the morning dew sparkle like tiny stars. The new truck waited for them, its red paint blazing in the morning light. As they climbed in, Jake caught one last glimpse of Lisa's grave in the rearview mirror. The sunlight had found its way through the branches just right, falling soft and warm across the stone, where their daughter's drawing rested, a reminder that love, like light, had a way of finding its path home. The autumn breeze carried the sound of trumpets and drums down Main Street as crowds gathered for Maple Grove's first Veterans Appreciation Day parade. Jake Harlow sat behind the wheel of what looked exactly like his old Ford pickup, but this one gleamed with fresh paint and chrome. His hands, still bearing the marks of healing burns, gripped the familiar steering wheel. "Surprise, Daddy!" Emma bounced in her seat, barely containing her excitement. "Tommy and Ryan worked on it for weeks. They found one just like yours and fixed it up special." Jake's eyes misted as he took in every detail. The dashboard had the same little scratch where Emma had once dropped her. "Lunchbox." Even the radio knobs matched perfectly. The Benson boys had outdone themselves, turning another old truck into an exact replica of the one he'd lost, saving their lives. From the sidewalk, Tommy and Ryan Benson waved, their faces proud but humble. Gone was their old arrogance, replaced by something deeper understanding, perhaps, or wisdom earned the hard way. They'd spent countless hours in the shop, determined to recreate every detail of Jake's beloved truck. "All right, folks," Mayor Wilson's voice boomed through the loudspeaker. "Let's get our parade started. Leading us today is someone who exemplifies the very best of our veterans, Mr. Jake Harlow." The crowd erupted in cheers. Jake felt his cheeks flush as he eased the truck forward. Emma waved enthusiastically from the passenger window, her smile bright enough to rival the autumn sun. Maple leaves danced in their wake as they drove slowly down Main Street. Behind them, a line of restored classic cars carried other veterans, each one with their own story of service and sacrifice. But today, all eyes were on Jake's truck, a symbol of everything their small town had learned about courage, integrity, and second chances. People lined the streets 3 deep, holding signs that read "Thank you, Veterans" and "Harlow Heroes." Jake recognized faces that had once turned away in judgment, now beaming with genuine warmth. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery held up a sign saying, "Our town's guardian angel." Even Mr. Roberts, his former landlord, stood tall and proud, saluting as Jake passed by. At the town square, the parade slowed to a stop. Frank Benson stepped up to the podium, his usual business suit replaced by a casual jacket that made him look more approachable, more human. The microphone squeaked as he adjusted it. "Friends and neighbors," Frank began, his voice thick with emotion. "When we planned this celebration, we thought we knew what a hero looked like. We pictured medals and uniforms, grand gestures, and dramatic tales." He paused, looking directly at Jake. "But true heroism, we've learned, often comes in quieter packages. It looks like a man in a rusty truck teaching his daughter that integrity matters more than appearance. It looks like someone who risks everything to do what's right, even when the whole town stands against him." Emma squeezed her father's hand as Frank continued. "Real heroes don't wear suits, they wear scars. Scars earned from serving our country, from fighting life's daily battles, from rushing into burning wreckage to save lives without a thought for their own safety." Frank's voice cracked slightly. "Jake Harlow taught us all what real courage looks like, not in grand speeches or showy displays, but in quiet dignity and unwavering principle." Tissues appeared throughout the crowd as Frank spoke. Grace Benson dabbed at her eyes while Tommy and Ryan stood straighter, their faces solemn with remembrance of that fiery night on the highway. "Today," Frank gestured to the replica truck, "we present this small token of our gratitude." The Benson boys spent weeks tracking down and restoring a truck exactly like the one Jake lost, saving their lives. Every detail matches right down to the coffee stain on the center console. This drew gentle laughter from the crowd. But more importantly, we're announcing that the Harlow Heroes Initiative will now include a scholarship fund for veterans' children, starting with a full college fund for Miss Emma Harlow. Emma gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. Jake pulled her close, his own tears falling freely now. The crowd's applause thundered through the square, echoing off the old brick buildings. As red, white, and blue confetti rained down from the rooftops, Jake held Emma tightly, her face pressed against his chest, right over his heart, the heart that had carried them through every storm, every challenge, every moment of doubt. "See, sweetheart," he whispered into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "Rust and all, we made it." The autumn sun caught the confetti as it fell, making it sparkle like stars in the crisp morning air. The restored truck gleamed behind them, a testament to transformation and the power of community. All around them, the town that had once turned its back now stood in celebration, having learned that true value lies not in the shine of the paint, but in the strength of the engine beneath. The evening sun painted the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and gold, casting long shadows across the rolling countryside as Jake's new truck hummed contentedly along the quiet country road. The Ford F-150, donated by the community after his heroic rescue, still felt almost too good to be true. Its polished silver paint gleamed in the dying light, and the leather seats smelled fresh and new, a far cry from the worn fabric and rattling dashboard of his beloved old pickup that had given its life in the flames. Emma had her window rolled down all the way, letting the crisp autumn air ruffle her hair as she breathed in the familiar sense of home. The sweet smell of hay from recently harvested fields mixed with the earthy aroma of turned soil, reminding Jake of simpler times when he was just a boy helping his grandfather with farm chores. Back then, the world had seemed so much smaller, so much more manageable. "Look at those colors, Daddy," Emma said, pointing with obvious wonder to where the sun melted into the horizon, like butter on warm toast. "It's like someone spilled paint all over the sky and forgot to clean it up." Jake smiled, glancing at his daughter with that familiar surge of paternal pride that never seemed to get old. She'd grown so much in these past months, not just in height, though she definitely shot up a few inches, but in spirit and understanding. The hardships they'd faced together had given her a wisdom beyond her 10 years, yet somehow hadn't dimmed her natural brightness or her ability to find beauty in the simplest things. "Sure is beautiful," he agreed, reaching over to adjust the radio volume slightly. Merle Haggard's gentle voice filled the comfortable silence between them, singing about second chances and keeping faith in tomorrow, words that seemed to speak directly to their recent journey through darkness toward light. Emma pulled out her sketchbook, the leather-bound one Grace Benson had given her as a gift, with her initials embossed on the cover, and started drawing the sunset with careful, practiced strokes. Her artistic skills had blossomed under Grace's gentle encouragement, and Jake often marveled at how his daughter could capture emotions in her drawings that adults struggled to express in words. "I was thinking," she said, her pencil moving confidently across the page as she captured the sun's golden glow. "Maybe when you open your workshop, I could help paint signs for it. Mrs. Patterson says I'm getting really good at lettering, and she thinks I might have real talent." Jake's heart swelled with pride so intense it almost took his breath away. "That would be perfect, sweetheart. Every good business needs an artist's touch, and I can't think of anyone I'd rather have helping me than you." The idea of the workshop had been growing in his mind like a seed in fertile soil. Frank Benson had approached him just last week with an offer to help with the startup costs, his voice earnest and humble as he insisted it wasn't charity but an investment in something the community desperately needed. "Veterans helping veterans," Frank had said, his eyes bright with genuine enthusiasm. "That's what this town needs more than anything." "What are you going to call it?" Emma asked, looking up from her drawing with curious eyes that reminded him so much of Lisa's it sometimes made his chest ache with bittersweet memory. Jake drummed his fingers thoughtfully on the steering wheel, feeling the smooth leather beneath his calloused hands. "Well, I was thinking second chance auto shop, because that's what it's all about, giving folks another shot at making things right, just like we got when everything seemed hopeless." Emma nodded approvingly, her face lighting up with excitement. "I like that. It sounds hopeful. And maybe we could have a special wall where veterans can hang pictures of their old service vehicles? You know, like a memory wall where they can share their stories." "Now that's some clever thinking," Jake said, reaching over to ruffle her hair affectionately. "You've got your mama's creative mind, that's for sure." She always could see possibilities where other folks just saw problems. The mention of Lisa brought a soft, peaceful smile to both their faces. These days, thinking of her didn't hurt quite as much as it used to. The sharp edges of grief had worn smooth over time, leaving behind something warmer, a sense that she was somehow riding along with them, sharing in their joy and watching over their new beginning with approval. The radio shifted to another song, an old Johnny Cash tune about redemption and second chances that Jake recognized immediately. He hummed along softly, remembering with crystal clarity how he used to dance with Lisa to this very song in their tiny kitchen, spinning her around between the refrigerator and the stove while Emma giggled from her high chair. "Daddy?" Emma's voice carried that thoughtful tone she got when she was working through something important in her mind. "Do you think the Benson boys will still come help at the workshop sometimes?" "They're actually pretty nice now that they've learned some manners." Jake chuckled, shaking his head in amazement at how much could change in such a short time. Amazing what a little humility can do for a person's character, isn't it? "But yes, I think they will. Tommy asked me just yesterday if I'd teach him more about diesel engines. Said he wants to understand how things really work. instead of just assuming money fixes everything. Same boys who had once mocked his old truck with such casual cruelty now sought out his knowledge eagerly, genuinely interested in learning from his experience and wisdom. It was a transformation that still amazed him sometimes, proof that people could change when life showed them what really mattered. And Grace said she'd bring lunch for everyone on opening day, Emma added excitedly, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. She makes the best chocolate chip cookies in the whole county. Even better than the ones at Miller's Bakery downtown. Jake nodded, thinking about how profoundly their lives had changed since that terrible night of the accident. The town that had once turned its back on them, whispered behind their backs, and made them feel like outcasts now embraced them as family. Every day brought new proof that doing the right thing, even when it hurt and even when it cost everything, eventually bore good fruit in ways you never expected. The truck's bright headlights suddenly caught the edge of a familiar sign, "Welcome to Maple Grove, population 2,847, painted in cheerful blue and white colors." Someone had recently added a small flower garden around the base, making it even more welcoming than before. Jake noticed that the population number had been updated too, reflecting the young families that had started moving to town, drawn by the positive changes happening in their little community. Emma put down her sketchbook and leaned against Jake's arm, her weight warm and comforting against his side. "I love our town, Daddy. Even with all the hard stuff that happened, I'm glad we stayed and fought for what was right." Jake wrapped one arm around her shoulders, keeping his other hand steady on the wheel as they passed under the streetlights that were just beginning to flicker on in the gathering dusk. "You know something, Emma? Maybe the road ahead doesn't get any easier, but with love in your heart and a good engine under the hood, there's no road we can't drive together." She nodded against his shoulder as they passed the welcome sign, heading toward home and whatever tomorrow might bring. The radio played softly in the background, and Jake caught the tail end of a song whose lyrics seemed to sum up everything they'd learned. Heroes aren't made of steel and chrome, they're made of heart and hope. The sun's last rays caught the chrome of the truck's grille, making it shine like a beacon of promise as they drove on through the peaceful evening, father and daughter, together and unafraid, facing whatever challenges lay ahead on the long road of life stretching out before them. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jake Harlow, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.